Yuri, thank you so much for having us a few minutes.
Of course.
Yuri, 1 year after the war in Ukraine, we have many doubts about what the end will be like, or how close we are to an end. According to Medvedev, the shipment of arms to Kiev from the Western allies threatens a global nuclear catastrophe. What do you think about? Do you think this fear or this, this fear is real?
Well, Medvedev doesn't really hold any power in Russia, honestly. He was president of Russia for 4 years, this is true, but this was because he has personal relations with Putin, and because Putin wanted to install somebody whom he could, remove safely in 4 years, and that's what happened. So Medvedev really doesn't have any power. His position is very formal. Putin is using him to frighten population in the world. So basically he's using him for blackmail, for this nuclear blackmail, and for propaganda purposes. The text which he is publishing, I'm sure in Spanish they are as terrible as they are in Russian, but they're written actually in terrible style. I mean, normal, educated people do not really speak this way and do not write this way. I do not really understand if you feel it when it's translated into Spanish or into other foreign languages. But the point is that Russia is conducting this war for more than a year now in Ukraine, and they're not able to win. And they're trying to stop the assistance which Ukraine is getting, and Ukraine is getting a lot of assistance financially. Refugees are taken by Europe, by the United States, and what's important, with weapons, of course. So they try to stop these shipments of weapons, saying that otherwise they would have to start a nuclear war. It's not that we should ignore it. I do not think so. I think our reaction to this should be that we should win this war, end this war as quickly as possible. But the only way to end it is to defeat Russia. And that's what Russia is knowing now. They understand that the West came to this understanding that we cannot stop this war through surrendering Ukraine, because this is not about Ukraine. You see, if this would be about Ukraine, well, all right, we could say, okay, Russia, take Ukraine and let's live peacefully. But this is not about Ukraine. This is about recreating of the old Soviet Union. This is about Belarus, which is already taken, Moldova, which Putin wants to take, the Baltic states, which he wants to have back, the influence over Eastern Europe, which he wants to take back. Poland was just mentioned again by Medvedev. Poland was never part of the Soviet Union. So this is not about Ukraine, and that's why it's important to win this war in Ukraine. Otherwise, it will spread. It will spread beyond Belarus, it will spread beyond Ukraine, and the Baltic states, Moldova and Poland will be next. So we have no choice but to stop this war in Ukraine.
As we are seeing or feeling the fear of this extension of the war, of course, we wonder if we are seeing now the beginning of Third World War. What do you think about?
Well, my previous book, which was published here as well, actually has the title World War III, The Battle for Ukraine. I think 24th of February 2022 will be written in textbooks as the beginning of the Third World War. I think we are at this Third World War, but the question is how this war will develop, how long this will take us to win, because we know that Russia is not be able to win. They're not able to win even against Ukraine. So it's, naive to think that Russia could win this war against the entire Europe or against NATO, right? So the question is how long this war will continue, how this will develop, and how much blood will be spilled before this war will be over. But my point is that since Ukraine is holding, and they're doing this successfully for 1 year, all we need to do is to help Ukraine with weapons to win this war. And they're able to do this. They just need a little bit more support with weapons. Everything else they have, I mean, we support them entirely. I travel through Europe, I see Ukrainian flags everywhere. And again, after 1 year of war, Russia is not capable to take control even partially of the Ukraine. So they are losing. They know that they are losing. So they're trying to stop this support through nuclear blackmail.
Mm-hmm. Meanwhile, we are knowing that a few Western allies and leaders are talking to Zelensky closed doors, and they are admitting that Ukraine can't win the war, and that there is a need to make concessions in exchange of more support in the NATO. Do you think this is a way that the Western allies can work with to make happen these peace negotiations?
Well, that's how it all started. When the war started, everybody tried to end this through negotiations. Like President Macron was calling to Putin, Biden was calling to Zelensky. The problem is that you cannot end this war giving parts of Ukraine territory. This will not end the war because Putin wants the entire Ukraine. Russia would never have negotiations for partial Ukraine. Ukrainians will not have negotiations for partial Ukraine because after this war is continuing for more than a year, after at least 200,000 people are killed on both ends, right? We still do not really have data, but we're probably talking about 100 to 200,000 Russians being killed and wounded, and maybe the same from Ukrainian side, because there are a lot of civilians who are killed by Russian bombardments and missiles. So it's a very bloody war. It's impossible to stop this war through negotiations. And I think by now, this is the position where the West, collective West, takes against Russia, and that's why we've seen recently the decision to give Ukraine tanks and some additional weapons, because now it's understandable, I think it's clear to everybody, that this war could be ended only through defeat of Russia. And for this, since Ukrainians have territory where they're fighting, since they have very capable army now, which is the most experienced army in Europe, unfortunately, but that's how it is. All they need is weapons, and this is for the West. This is the cheapest way to achieve victory. Otherwise, the Russian aggression will spread into Eastern Europe. Otherwise, NATO would have to be involved, openly and officially, and it's going to be more serious and more bloody. So again, the only way to stop this war is by helping Ukrainians with weapons.
In your book about Ukraine, you talk about Czechoslovakia. Is the case of Czechoslovakia in the Second World War the example that would resemble the Ukrainian war?
Precisely. You see, that's how the Second War developed, the Second World War. The West was giving up territories to Hitler with the hope that he will stop at one point. And then, of course, after he got Czechoslovakia, after he united all Germans within the borders of one state, and this basically was the main propagandistic and geopolitical goal of Hitler, he still started the Second World War on 1st of September when he attacked Poland. And this is the only lesson probably which we should learn from the history of the Second World War as the main lesson, that when you give up territories like Ukraine, you are not able to achieve peace. This is not going to happen. It will spread further. Putin will never stop. Ironically, Putin will never stop. He is, in this sense, he is like Hitler. He is going to go further and further unless he is stopped. Again, similar to the way Hitler was behaving himself prior to the beginning of the Second World War and after the beginning of the Second World War.
Mm-hmm. Is Russia state-controlled and run by former KGB, current FSB? How important is that right now for the development of the Ukrainian war?
Well, this is actually a very important question, because Russia is not really a dictatorship. If Putin would be a dictator, well, we could say, let's take dictator down and everything would be nice and peaceful again. No, this is not so. We have a collective leadership. Putin was installed in power in 2000 by the FSB, by the state security. This is a very serious organization, huge one, old one. This is an organization which was formed in December of 1917. It's more than 100 years old. This is the only structure which survived the collapse of the Soviet Union. And they installed their president in 2000. So we are dealing not with Putin as a president, we are dealing with a kind of collective power, the main component of which is the FSB, the state security. And actually, if you look at Russia today, this is the only country, and we do not really have examples of this in history, when state security would run a state, especially a nuclear state. That's why it's extremely dangerous. That's why it's extremely difficult to deal with them. But we know in order to deal with them, we have to understand what the danger is. So the danger is not Putin as a dictator, and unfortunately, if we take him down, if he dies tomorrow, I'm afraid nothing will change. The problem is much more complicated, and we have to defeat Russia, we have to change regime in Russia, and then again Russia would become a normal peaceful country, which is tried to be in August of 91 when Communist Party was taken down and Russia was on the way to democracy. And then of course this process was broken by the activity and involvement of the FSB, which successfully took power in 2000.
Yuri, will Putin end up in Ukraine, or as you say in the book about Ukraine as the first battle of the Third World War, is this the first phase of an environment that will lead to retaking all former Soviet republics under a new empire?
Well, Putin started to make these declarations about recreation of the Soviet Union in 2007, and it's questionable if he really wants to recreate the entire Soviet Union, because Soviet Union had some Asian territories, and there were not really too many attempts to take those territories back. But after the invasion of Ukraine, and so after 24th of 22, and Putin really believes that he would be able to take Ukraine very, very quickly, he basically at that point said that he is not happy with the borders of 1991. He is not happy with the fact that those Eastern European countries joined NATO, and he actually would like to have back the influence which the Soviet Union had over Europe. So indeed, in March of 22, he was talking about spreading this influence of the Russian Federation literally towards the borders of Germany. And this was the plan, and that's why what's happening in Ukraine, of course, was unexpected. They were not prepared to have this war. They were prepared to occupy Ukraine very quickly and proceed further. So now they're in a situation, and they do understand this, when they're not able to win the war. This doesn't really mean, this is not so simple, this doesn't really mean that Ukrainians are winning this war. This is not really so, but for them to win the war, they have to conduct an offensive war instead of defensive war. So far they are holding the aggression, but they're not able to proceed because, again, the West is trying to be very careful, and it's understandable because we have Medvedev who is tweeting all these nuclear threats. So the West is trying to be very careful, but the goal which Russia has, it's simple, to stop the supply of weapons. And they're trying to do their best to achieve this. Their best is to blackmail us with nuclear threat.
One last question about an agreement, about a peace. Is it only worthwhile for the West to win the war, or can there be a negotiated solution in a peace agreement? And what do you think about the China's proposal?
Well, China will try to negotiate, but the conditions for negotiations are very simple. Russia has to recognize borders of 2013 in relation to Ukraine. Russia has to withdraw its troops. Russia has to agree in principle to pay reparations for the damage which was done, and every day brings more and more and more damage, and at the end it's going to be more and more and more expensive to Russia to pay for it and to cover it. And I'm afraid again that now, after 1 year, Russia would have to agree to give away war criminals for international tribunal to be judged for crimes committed. The problem is that the longer this war is going on, there are more and more crimes committed. So you cannot just give away Putin and say that he's the only person responsible for this war. This is not so. So it's becoming very complicated, and the only way to change it is to be sure that there are people in Russia who would agree that the main enemy of the Russian state is President Putin and those people around him. And then we have a chance to have peaceful solution and peaceful development in Russia. But once again, what Putin is doing, of course it's damaging for Ukraine. Of course it's damaging for the entire Europe. But mainly it's destroying Russia. Believe it or not, the damage which Putin have done in relation to Russia is unbelievably high. Russia probably would not be able to survive this war as a state. Ukraine will be rebuilt. This will take some time, this will take some money, but Ukraine will be rebuilt. Russia probably would not be able to survive this war because Russia would have complications similar to Germany after 1945, when the entire population at one point would understand that they were participating in a major crime, when children and grandchildren would hate their parents. So what Putin is doing for Russia is extremely damaging, and the quickest way, the best way, again, to stop all this is to be sure that the people in Russia who are able to rule Russia for the next generations, and who would understand that the damage is done first of all against Russia, and maybe even secondly against Ukraine and the entire Europe.
Well, Russia won't survive this war. We will keep it as a headline to understand better this whole situation. Really difficult to explain and to know what will happen in the future. But thank you so much for explaining to us this paradigm we have right now in geopolitical, the geopolitical photography picture in general. Yuri Felshtinsky. Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure, and good luck with the new book. Thank you so much.